Hello and welcome to another episode of The Switch. My name is Myra Briggs and I am excited about this week's topic. Did you know that the nonprofit HR brand ecosystem has exclusively focused on the talent management needs of the social sector, including nonprofits and social enterprises for more than 20 years? This episode is all about leveraging technology for 21st century interviewing. Listen in as Yvonne Rivera, Director of Talent Acquisition at Nonprofit HR, Sadina Montani, shareholder at Vedder Price's Labor and Employment Practice, and Erin Brown, former talent management consultant with Nonprofit HR, share how to employ nimble and efficient recruitment processes to compete for talent in today's highly competitive talent acquisition environment. Share this production in your communities and download the slides and transcript. Visit www.nonprofithr.com/The Switch for a video recording, presentation slides, and other assets. Now, without further ado, here's Yvonne, Sadina, and Erin.
Yvonne Rivera is a bilingual professional who brings more than 20 years of diverse credentials to nonprofit HR. She is an established talent acquisition strategist with a proven track record in providing exceptional service, developing strong relationships with hiring managers, and providing full life cycle recruitment of quality employees from C-suite to entry level to ensure a strong candidate pipeline, all while having the ability to manage multiple recruiting projects simultaneously with sometimes inflexible deadlines. She brings deep experience supporting the recruitment needs of the nonprofit sector. As a director of talent acquisition at Nonprofit HR, Yvonne leads our direct hire, contingent talent, and recruitment outsourcing activities, including building and cultivating client and candidate relationships and enhancing the firm's opportunities to continue to serve as a valued business partner with our clients. Sadina Montani is a shareholder in Vedder Price's Labor and Employment Practice area. Ms. Montani regularly represents employers in state and federal courts and before various administrative agencies defending claims of race, sex, disability, age discrimination, wrongful termination, wage violations, and wage payment claims. As Ms. Montani counsels and conducts training programs for her clients on all types of employment-related issues, including harassment and discrimination issues, termination issues, including reductions in force, ADA compliance and discrimination issues, FMLA and FLSA compliance, USERRA compliance, and various federal and state employment laws. Ms. Montani routinely conducts and guides clients through challenging internal investigations. Additionally, Ms. Montani has significant experience with wage and hour matters and regularly conducts wage and hour audits for clients to ensure FLSA compliance. I will now turn it over to Yvonne to begin her program.
Thank you, Erin, for the introduction. Hi, my name is Yvonne Rivera. I'm our Director of Talent Acquisition here at Nonprofit HR. I oversee our temporary staffing, our direct hire, and recruitment outsourcing practices. Nonprofit HR, we work exclusively with the nonprofit community, placing talent at all levels. If you need some short-term help, we can be there with temporary staffing, but if you need a more senior candidate for a permanent position, I would recommend our direct hire services. We take care of the full recruiting process from start to offer. Then our recruitment outsourcing practice is a new offering for the firm. I would best describe it as a kind of an a la carte recruitment service. We can do as much or as little of the process for you. Our purpose is to act as an extension of your recruitment staff. So first off, we'll kick it off with the screening and interviewing methods that appeal to the tech-savvy and increasingly remote and contingent workforce. Then we are going to navigate the rights, the wrongs, and the definitely nots of using social media in the recruitment process. And we will round this all out with using technology to build dialogue with active and passive candidates.
This event was originally recorded as a Nonprofit HR webinar. Check out other Nonprofit HR events and virtual learning opportunities at nonprofithr.com/events.
We will also at the end we'll do our Q&A. So let's get right into the content. So 21st century screening and interviewing methods. We all know that with all the technology out there right now that's enhancing our screening and interviewing processes, I'm sure we've all experienced being bombarded by all these sales reps constantly wanting to sell us up with, their new and exciting tools. So we thought this would be a really good opportunity to explore some of these technologies and talk through the do's and the don'ts. Since there's a legal component to all of these issues that we'll be talking about, we've invited Sadina Montani to speak on all of these legal risks with us. So one of the most important takeaways, I think, is to make sure that your organization has a consistent interview process for all the candidates. And I'm just going to go over the basic steps of the interview process. I'll go through them quickly. We make sure that, the process, we'll all post that job vacancy first. We want to make sure we pre-screen phone interview the candidates in a pre-screening method. Then proceed to an in-person or maybe a video interview. Definitely do the backgrounds, the references. And then that last step is, of course, that job offer, negotiating the compensation with the candidates. All right, so some of the tools or technology that we're using to kind of augment our interview process, the AI technology, that artificial intelligence. Some of the latest of these bots, one of them is called Maya. She was developed by a startup company in 2016. There's another one. It's funny, they all have women's names. The other one is Olivia, and she was developed by an organization called Recruitment AI. These tools are obviously just really to enhance the applicant process. It engages the candidates. It makes it more interactive for them, and you have a better outcome as far as that candidate experience. And also, we're in a really tight labor market. So it's something that makes you a little different from your competitor. Some of the other tools, we talked about video interviewing. This would be platforms like Zoom or Skype, Messenger, and I even believe that LinkedIn is developing a platform of their own. So it's here definitely to stay. As far as the pre-recorded video interviewing, some of the most popular out of a kind of a poll that we did is one called Vidcruiter, one that's called RIVS, Digital Interviewing, and Spark Hire, which I think a lot of our clients are using.
You're listening to The Switch. Follow along with this podcast. Download the slides and other visual materials at nonprofithr.com/The Switch.
With all those technologies in mind, here are some of the pros and the cons of using some of these tools. So I'll kind of go through some of them and we'll talk them through. Some of the pros of using the video interviewing are the logistics, right? So if you have a number of people in a panel that you need to coordinate for an interview, it's so much easier on you, the logistics-wise, if it's going to be video. You send them a Zoom link and you're good to go. As far as it's maximizing the recruiter's time as well, because the recruiter doesn't have to, they can go from one interview to the next, to the next, to the next, and have a really productive block of time where, of course, if you had an in-person interview, you would have to, say goodbye to the person, get up, take them to the door, and so it makes it more efficient. We're also expanding our geographic talent pool, right? So I can be in Washington, D.C., but I'm interviewing people in Minnesota, in California, Chicago, so it expands our pool, especially in this tight labor market. Also, it reduces the job seekers' travel expenses and their time. Because some of these job seekers might be located in a different state, and they have to take time off, use their leave, and they don't really want to be taking leave off, to come to interviews. So they can sit at their home, they can log on to their computer on their cell phone, and be just as productive. But of course, with any pros, there's going to be cons with everything. So some of the things that we do lose, right, by doing the video interviewing are some of those soft skills, that eye contact that we have, in the interview. Some of the, we can't quite gauge maybe the professionalism sometimes. I mean, sometimes people dress up, they're in their suits and ready to go. One of the other areas is also demography. It could be that we, our unconscious biases, right? We're looking at this person, through a video screen, and that could be a definite con for that applicant. Also, the ability to use or access this technology. Are we excluding, people from from being part of the applicant pool because they may not have access to this technology? So we need to be really careful with that as well. And lastly, and I'm just going to mention it, and then I'm going to pass it on to Sadina with her expertise. But the Americans with Disabilities Act, we have to consider that as well. Take it away.
Thank you. And thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here. So we will talk about just a few of the legal issues in terms of the legal risks, the legal issues, things to be thinking about proactively as you are using technology in the interview process. Specifically, when you're doing any kind of technology-based interviewing, you need to be really cognizant of your obligations under the ADA to make sure that you're accommodating folks who have disabilities that may hinder their ability to interact using technology. The requirement to accommodate individuals in the workplace doesn't just start once they come in the door. There actually is a requirement to accommodate their disabilities as part of the application process. So the same interactive process you would engage in when they're an employee to determine what accommodation will enable them to perform the job duties is also something you need to be mindful of in the interviewing process to make sure that you're giving them access to technology in a way that is consistent with their abilities to function in light of a potential disability. One of the cons that was mentioned a moment ago was the inability to kind of judge the soft skills. I think it cuts both ways when you're talking about concerns that interviewers or you have judging interviewees, but you need to be really mindful as an interviewer how you're approaching it. It can be less formal when you are engaging using technology, and you need to be mindful of that, particularly as you're thinking about protected classes and how that plays into the decision-making process. Obviously, all hiring decisions need to be made without regard to any of the legally protected classes. It could be race, national origin, gender, age, of course. In jurisdictions like D.C. and New York and California, there are a lot more protected classes. For example, in D.C., political affiliation, familial status, whether you're married or divorced, your political leanings, I'm not sure if I already said that, your personal appearance, there's lots of protected classes, so you really need to be mindful of that. It's a lot easier to step into those minefields when you're using technology because it can feel more casual. The ability to record conversations is one of those areas in which technology is both good and bad. It can be very, very good to ensure consistency with your interviewers. It also, and I'm coming at this from a lawyer and a litigator in some instances, when things really go off the rails, it can also be evidence, right? So if you have an interviewer who's not being particularly cautious about their questions and they ask a question like, how does your husband feel about all the travel associated with this job in light of the fact that you have kids? That's going to be a big problem, and then you have it recorded. So all the more reason to be really careful about training interviewers. And just as an aside, a number of states require that obviously all parties to recording approve of it and consent. So, just another bit of small print to be mindful of. It can be really useful, though, to record interviews and transcribe them and then use those as training guides for other interviewers. I would not recommend showing the video. The last thing you want to do is, talk to your staff about how terrible this particular interviewer was or the interviewee and have everyone sitting around the table laughing at them. There's very, very little that good that can come from that.
You have been listening to The Switch, a nonprofit HR podcast on powering your people with talent management insights, best practices, and hacks. Looking for a thought partner to help you integrate talent into your mission's strategic plan? Well, the good news is Nonprofit HR has solutions to meet your unique talent management needs. Strategic planning is an annual ritual for many nonprofits. Yet, countless organizations plan for programs and fundraising without thinking about the talent needed to meet those goals and ultimately their mission. With more than 20 years of expertise under our belt and the bench strength of credentialed consultants, we partner with all mission types and offer solutions that span project-based human resources consulting and outsourcing, search, total rewards,
and DEI. Join the community of social impact organizations that have trusted nonprofit HR to help them achieve their full potential through their people.
A few other legal issues, pro tips to really keep in mind is that, you need to be mindful of the legal compliance issues, whether you're doing an interview that's in person or using technology. And so these really are present throughout. As I mentioned before, hiring decisions need to be made without regards to protected classes, and having a really consistent interview process, as Yvonne mentioned, is really important to make sure that you make a good hiring decision, but also to address the potential legal ramifications that come from a failure to hire someone, which is an adverse employment action from a legal standpoint in the same way that a decision to fire someone is.
I wanted to see if anyone had any questions before we moved on.
What is your organization really looking for when searching for social media? Will I like the person?
Do we have friends in common? Verify details on their resume. So these are obviously some of the, some of the don'ts. Really what we want to, talk about is that you really can't, like we call, don't be creepy. Don't be creepy, and snoopy. Because, when you go into and snooping through people's backgrounds and just for no reason at all, because unless your organization has you have to have a consistent social media search criteria in order to, to be really using social media as in your recruitment process. You can't just willy-nilly be looking up people and seeing if you like them or not, or they have friends that might be in common. Those are just not things that we do. And there's a lot of legal ramifications to all of this, which Sadina's gonna talk about in a little bit. All right. So we're gonna talk a little bit about establishing this consistent social media criteria. So is there a legitimate business reason, right, for you to be doing, and going into the social media and researching these candidates? You need to standardize that social media research. You need to determine which sites might be appropriate. And Sadina, of course, feel free to chime in since this is your domain. You need to train your interviewers or decision makers not to engage online searches. And again, the consistency, be consistent and document. You have to treat everyone exactly the same. Only provide relevant information to relevant decision makers, right? You're not going to be doing the search and then giving this information to the whole HR department. It just doesn't make any sense, and can get you in a lot of trouble. And then one thing that I did, that I'm going to mention because I've had personal experiences with hiring managers, that the managers are prodding way too much and violating all of what we've talked about. And so you need to really be cautious with what you're doing. So we're trying to educate, people to not go down these rabbit holes because they can get into a lot of trouble. Sadina?
Well, so this is one of my personal soapbox issues, is the trouble that employers can get in when they're engaging too casually in social media. And so just to touch on a few of these points that Yvonne mentioned, is there a legitimate business reason for the social media searching? Curiosity is not a sufficient reason to be prodding around 72 weeks into someone's Instagram history, right? Just trying to find out if their dogs are cute, that's all you will see on my Instagram feed, or if you think you'll be friends with them. Those things have nothing to do with the hiring process. And so even though we live in an era where so much of our personal business and technology is available, that does not mean that you should be digging through those as someone who's engaged in the hiring process. It really, really is important to think critically as part of the onboarding and recruiting process about what it is you might be trying to accomplish in your social media searches. I don't think there's ever a legitimate business reason to be looking through someone's Instagram feed, but LinkedIn is a great resource. So are you using social media to figure out if you like the person, not a reason to hire them, or are you looking to determine whether they've been truthful about certain articles that they've authored, for example, or what their job history is? So again, being thoughtful about what searches or what sites you're using is really important, and who's doing those searches. I think that if you take nothing from my being on the soapbox for just a moment, it's that you should be making sure that folks who are actually the ultimate decision makers, if you have interviewers who are managers or who are just business folks or the executive director, do not let them do their own social media searches. I have the good and bad fortune of having a memorable but very unique name, and I will tell a story using my name as though I were using the circumstances of one of my very best friends who happens to have MS. Luckily, she does not have a very common name, but she also doesn't have, friends who are out there doing MS marches for them. But that's something that you see all the time, right? People who are organizing events for their friends who may have specific medical conditions. Obviously, folks are sophisticated enough not to ask anyone in an interview, do you have any particularly expensive neurological disorders that are going to cost us a lot of money and that potentially could impact, your health down the road. No one would ask that in an interview. But if you were, let's say that I had MS, and let's say that I have friends who are super supportive and wanted to organize a march in my name, if you Google my name, it's very likely that could come up. And then all of a sudden, you have that information and you can't see it. So there is real danger here that is part of just a willy-nilly social media process. You're inadvertently finding out information that you don't want to have, which leads very nicely into the next point on our next slide, which is inadvertent discovery of protected information or classification. Just be really mindful of the fact that you can easily come across stuff that you should not and you do not want to know as part of the hiring process. Whenever I often go on site and work with entire HR teams, and one of the things that I talk to them about in the recruiting process is that recruiting is not dating, right? So the things that you might look for if you're starting to date someone are not the same as the things you would look for if you're recruiting them for a job. Being mindful of, it seems like a silly distinction and the folks who are in this room are kind of laughing at it, but it's true. And really thinking about the recruiting process is strictly about the job description, the job duties, and the qualifications will go a long way to making sure that everyone who is involved in the process is really being mindful of avoiding the legal minefields that exist here. Something else just to note is that off-duty conduct that is lawful is protected under most state laws. So, for example, if you see that someone in their off time is doing something, they're engaging in political marches, or if you're in a jurisdiction like DC, they are using. You may have drug-free workplace policies, so this could be a little complicated depending on the workplace. But if you see that they're engaging in marijuana use, or if you see, frankly, even that they're getting intoxicated, as long as they're over 21, that's lawful. So you need to be mindful that is in many jurisdictions not something you can be making a decision about. And then just a note on the background check issue, because I think this is one of the areas where social media kind of background checks is a little nebulous, and you need to be really cautious here. Is that if you are doing too much of a involved social media check and you're looking on, for example, court websites to see if someone has convictions, that is something that you need to avoid very seriously, because there are obligations under federal law to make sure you get consent from folks to run background checks. And in jurisdictions like DC, for example, where we have the ban the box law that you may have heard about, you actually can't even run a background check until you've made a conditional offer of employment. And so it's not only the case that just engaging in social media searches could run afoul of the Fair Credit Reporting Act, but you also could be violating state laws with regard to asking about or inquiring regarding criminal background checks before you're allowed to as part of the hiring process. So just to close on some of the legal risks here, I would urge that this is an area that more attention needs to be paid to. It's clearly not hiring someone is not as risky as firing someone, and I often get more calls about how to exit someone from an organization than making a hiring decision. But I will tell you that the EEOC and local agencies like in DC, the Department of Employment Services, or whatever your like the Maryland Human Rights Commission, they really are paying closer attention to the hiring process generally. So this is an area where there will be increased legal risk. I also think that individuals who are not hired have less incentive not to file a claim against an employer. I apologize for the double negative, but the idea is that if you're an employee and you're with an organization, you want to keep your job, you're less likely to just run off to the EEOC or the Office of Human Rights to file a charge of discrimination because you don't want that to impact your future with an organization. If someone has not been hired, they have very little incentive not to bring a charge against an organization that did not hire them if they think that the reasons they weren't hired were for unlawful reasons. So it is an area with some risk.
You're listening to The Switch. Follow along with this podcast. Download the slides and other visual materials at nonprofithr.com/The Switch.
What it means and what to do if someone has no social media footprint, which can seem very odd. I talked about dating a little bit ago. When I started dating my husband, who has the most vanilla name in the world, I could not find him anywhere on the internet. And I agree, it gave me a little bit of pause because I thought maybe he was using a name that wasn't his own. Hiring is not dating, right? And so you need to be thinking about, again, what are the business reasons for doing a social media search? If there are things that you would generally be looking for, did they author a certain article? Did they really work for the organizations they're saying that they did? There are other ways you can get to that information without freaking out because someone doesn't have a Twitter feed, right? So be mindful of that. It may not be that they are some kind of serial killer. It may just be that they have a very common name or they have chosen not to be on social media. There are some positions, of course, if someone is a high-level executive and they don't have a presence on LinkedIn, that would be odd. So that might be something that you would ask about. But, there's no harm at all in looking at someone's LinkedIn page as part of the recruiting process. So that is completely fair game, and that is a totally reasonable question to be asking.
All righty. So now we are at our last learning objective. So using technology to build dialogue with active and passive candidates. What we're trying to talk about here is really when we're engaging and using this, technology for candidates, we need to make sure that our recruiters and the hiring managers are not only engaging with candidates, but they're also, being responsive. And by responsive, I mean we're all on LinkedIn, right? And we are blasting out and we're sending emails and we're asking, candidates either they're interested or they know of people that may be interested. So you really, these folks reach back out to you and they respond either negative, either saying, look, I'm not interested or thank you for thinking of me, but I'll think of some candidates and maybe, get them your way. Whatever that response might be, you need to respond, because you never know when you're going to reach out to them again. So again, being responsive and to keep these folks engaged, because when you want to reach out to them again, they're not going to reach back out. And the other piece to that too is whenever we're sending, in-mails or any type of technology that we're using, we're also tying it back to the organization that we're representing, right? And we all are representing the organization's brand. So if we're not responsive, if we're not doing the right things, if we're not engaging these candidates in the right manner, that comes back to the organization as a whole. They might not just, target you. They're thinking, okay, now I don't want to work with this organization because of X, Y, Z reason. And so we also need to remember that candidates, are at different spectrums, right, in their job search process. So we want to be mindful to these differences and make sure that we're engaging with them, properly. And that kind of leads into, we need to be consistent. Again, the consistency of everything. We need to be consistent using the messages. We can't be misleading candidates and maybe using terminology that might be misleading to them. And they might be thinking, oh, I got the job, or, oh, there's an opportunity open for me, or things of that nature. You really need to provide templates, right, to those either recruiters or hiring managers, if they're the ones that are going to be sending out messages that have consistency in that message. Because the last thing you want to do is mislead a candidate. And lastly, providing them, providing these hiring managers, recruiters with tips on managing the expectations of these candidates that you're trying to engage with. Again, it all really boils down to the candidate experience as well as the brand that you're representing. And a lot of things can come back really, to haunt you. And now Sadina will pass it back and we'll explore some of the legalities of what we were just talking about.
Excellent. there's a question that I am going to take.
Yes, so somebody asked, is LinkedIn the only social media place that we can check?
That's a great question. It's certainly the safest. And I would go back again, not to give the standard lawyer answer of it depends, but it does depend, right? So if you are looking on social media to find out if they have actually published articles or if they are who they say they are, kind of, generally in terms of, where they live, that kind of thing, you could check Twitter. I think that Twitter is probably next in line in terms of safety. If there's a reason that you're going, again, 72 weeks back into their Twitter feed, you may need to ask whether that's looking for curiosity's sake alone. LinkedIn is the safest. I would say Twitter is next. I think that Facebook and Instagram start to get you into real questions, and I generally would ask you to pause very, very hard before you start digging through either of those social media sites, unless there is a very, very specific reason that you're doing so. Did we have any other questions?
Yes. Sadina, do you have examples of cases where people have gotten in trouble using social media, such as saying something inappropriate?
So I haven't had any legal cases yet, and I have to tell you, I am shocked that there haven't been legal cases. I have had the charges that I've dealt with in the interviewing process have been just generally stepping in the areas that you shouldn't be. Questions about travel and spouses. My favorite one was when I had someone asked a question about whether someone who had identified in small talk as being a parent, whether she was planning on having more children. And you can see very easily how that would be even easier to find yourself in that situation if you have been digging around in social media, right? That happened to just be small talk that led to that question. But if someone's been digging around in social media and they see on someone's Facebook page, their children or some pregnancy photographs or whatever the case may be, and just casually ask that question, suddenly you've got a pretty reasonable charge of discrimination that you're defending against. I think a lot of reasons why those don't get into full-blown litigation and probably settle at the EEOC or agency level is because there's not a whole lot that you can do to defend against that when, as part of the interviewing process, someone asks one of those questions. It's really hard to prove why you've gone with another candidate instead of that person. The consistency goes a long way to that. So does documentation. Not to get too far down a rabbit hole here, but if you're going to do social media searches, having a checklist that whomever in your recruiting or HR team is responsible for those, which sites they checked on which date, what information they passed on to others, so it can be very clear when appropriate information is shared or not, can go a long way towards defending against those. And going incognito if you're able to is a great idea. Although again, as long as there's a business reason, it's perfectly fine. And the last thing you want is, I keep going back to Instagram, but if you accidentally like someone's Instagram picture from 72 weeks ago, it's going to be hard to take that back.
You have been listening to The Switch, a nonprofit HR podcast on powering your people with talent management insights, best practices, and hacks. Looking for a thought partner to help you integrate talent into your mission strategic plan? Well, the good news is Nonprofit HR has solutions to meet your unique talent management needs. Strategic planning is an annual ritual for many nonprofits, yet countless organizations plan for programs and fundraising without thinking about the talent needed to meet those goals and ultimately their mission. With more than 20 years of expertise under our belt and the bench strength of credentialed consultants, we partner with all mission types and offer solutions that span project-based human resources, consulting, and outsourcing, search, total rewards, and DEI. Join the community of social impact organizations that have trusted nonprofit HR to help them achieve their full potential through their people.
Do we have other questions?
Yeah, here's a question for Yvonne. How can hiring managers match culture to a candidate's values? Is that something that can be researched in your opinion or only done in person?
How to match culture?
So I think they're saying how you can match the culture you want in your organization, how you can in an interview, how you try to understand how somebody's going to fit in your culture. So how you can do that by doing online interviewing, for instance, or if you're doing social media searches. Is there a way to research that, or is that just something that you can only glean from an in-person interview?
It depends on how you're, again, you have to have the clear questions and being able to, understand your parameters, right? Because like Sadina said a little while ago, even political affiliation is protected in the District of Columbia. So we work with a lot of different nonprofits with different missions and obviously a variety of cultures. So we need to navigate through those questions. Sometimes we do get into small talk and you can understand, and so, and there are certain ways of saying and getting to those those cultural fits, right? It could be an organization that's faith-based, or it could be an organization that's very one way or the other politically inclined, and so you can have these conversations, but again in a consistent manner. You have to ask everyone the same questions in your interview process to glean that culture.
Yeah, and I would just add, it depends on what you mean by culture, right? If you have a culture of, from a work style standpoint, if you have a culture of candor and frankness when it comes to giving feedback, that is an incredibly important thing to be talking to your candidates about. If there are different work styles on a team, understanding how they're going to navigate those things is very, very important. I don't think those are issues that you can glean well from social media, but I think it speaks to the larger interviewing process and how you communicate those kind of lower C cultural issues to candidates using technology as opposed to sitting across from them in a conference room is something to be really thoughtful about, and how you're crafting those questions so that even when you're looking at someone through a computer screen, you're able to really address those issues and ask the right questions to understand it from a work style standpoint. And a work culture standpoint, they're going to be a good fit for the team that they would be working on.
Again, it's having the right questions, to ask, and they're, the right legal questions.
So one of the things to be mindful about when your recruiters or HR team is coordinating and working with candidates is not to overpromise. I have actually had a couple of cases where people have sued a potential employer because they thought they were going to have a job offer. They quit their job, they gave their notice, and then it turns out they actually did not have a job offer. And so being really thoughtful about, what you're communicating to them during the process actually is important, and there can be some legal risk there. Letting a lawyer take a look at your template script that Yvonne mentioned earlier is never a bad idea. It should take a good and trustworthy lawyer no more than 15 minutes to look at like your standard emails, really. And so having someone issue spot for you, I think is a good idea to make sure those communications are tight. You're not over promising, and you're remembering that all of these communications can be potential evidence if you were to have a charge of discrimination or later a lawsuit brought by someone who wasn't hired if they think it was for an unlawful reason. As I mentioned, the EEOC has been paying a lot more attention to the hiring process, so this is a bit of a hot button issue, and states as well. This is one of the areas in which I've seen states really step in from a regulatory standpoint and fill in gaps where they think that federal law doesn't do the trick. So the ban the box laws that you see, DC, Illinois, I think New York has them as well. Until very recently, until I would say 6 or 7 years ago, it was only Hawaii, weirdly, that had this legislation. Now it's in a lot of local jurisdictions as well. So it's something that people are paying a lot more attention to. It's something to be really mindful about. So with anything, when you're talking about legal risk, consistency, we're sounding a bit like a broken record, but that really, really is key. Consistency and documentation, those are the things that you are going to rely on very heavily should things go off the rail. Be really thoughtful about the background check issue, as I mentioned earlier. Engage a legal counsel, even just for a little bit of time, to make sure that the process that you're using is consistent with what your local jurisdiction requires. Having someone take a look at your offer letters to make sure that you are providing the information that you're required to once you get to that step is really important. There are, in DC and in New York and California, there are really specific requirements for notice about wages and the wage payments and what is included in wages, how they're paid, how often. These are really nitpicky things, but they can be easily missed, and they are low-hanging fruit for attorneys who might want to bring lawsuits on behalf of employees and, frankly, class actions. I have 2 class actions going on right now, one in DC, one in California, that deal with overtime issues, but baked into those cases are issues around wage notice requirements that seems like a very simple thing, but is often missed and is worth spending a little bit of time with a trusted lawyer to make sure that you're getting those right. One issue that folks often forget about when they're thinking about the recruiting process is that there can be non-solicitation obligations, either between the organization you're with or for which you're hiring, or for individuals who are with the organization and their obligations not to solicit away their former colleagues. So, for example, if you're directly at an organization and you are trying to, hire from an organization that you've done business with before. This comes up less, I'm sure, in the nonprofit space than it does, for example, in the government contracting space, but it still is something to be thoughtful about. If there is any kind of contractual relationship between 2 companies, maybe buried in a contract somewhere is a provision that says you're not allowed to actively recruit and hire this other company's, this other organization's employees. I just tried a case about this a few months ago, and it can be very messy. What does active recruitment look like? It's a lot easier if you're actually being thoughtful about the process, and at the time you're saying, we'll interview this person if they come to us, but we're not reaching out to them or documenting it at the time. So another unexpected way that you can face legal risks in the recruiting process. So with that, I wonder, do we have any other questions?
We do have some questions. Q&A.
Oh, we are at the official Q&A, not just the informal Q&A.
So somebody mentioned that in their organization, they recently had a situation where they made an offer to somebody, and the candidate posted on social media that she was still considering other offers, but she let them know that she had accepted theirs. So they were at a loss regarding what to do. Do you have any advice in that situation?
Well, there's nothing unlawful about saying in social media that you're considering other offers. I think that if she had said, I'm going to take a job at this other employer's, and then it turns out she's accepted your offer, there could be an opportunity to reach back out and say, just to confirm, you're starting next Tuesday. We look forward to seeing you. I wonder if this was, how it was that the organization came to have that knowledge. If they were following her on Twitter, or it seems an odd thing for someone to post. It may raise questions about their business judgment. In all candor, right? Like if someone is being sloppy like that, you've already made the decision. I don't think it's appropriate to revoke it, but I would say that's probably someone you want to be watching pretty closely when they come in the door to make sure that they actually do have good business judgment.
This event was originally recorded as a nonprofit HR webinar. Check out other nonprofit HR events and virtual learning opportunities at nonprofithr.com/events.
Okay, thank you. Another question for those of us that have geographic pay, such as different pay depending on where you live, how do we note that in recruitment and hiring?
So if the question is how you're communicating that externally, I think that's it's a pretty standard practice. And so, you can certainly say, pay depending on geography. I see that quite a bit. And that's certainly an appropriate thing to do. I think that where things tend to get a little sticky, and I've had this come up a few times, is where, folks are living, let's say, in St. Louis, and they are interviewing for a remote job, but they want the Chicago pay, and they say, well, I'm actually going to be moving to Chicago. There's no real specific legal issue. It just gives me a heartburn from a little bit of a business judgment standpoint again. And I think that, being consistent with how you're communicating those requirements so that you can usually say to the person, well, you're in St. Louis, this is our pay for that geography. And if that's not something that's that you're willing to take, we understand. I hope that addresses the question. Close enough?
I think so.
So maybe this is probably for Yvonne. What types of things are you looking for online when you're trying to verify facts from people's resumes?
Usually, I mean, when we're verifying facts on people's resumes, usually when we've asked them, to release their, it's really with a background. I mean, when we're looking at facts, really for education, it's really where you're going to be focused on facts, and then when we do the job, it's when we're doing the reference checks. So those are the 2 hours. What?
All that LinkedIn information.
Right, and that we're going to verify maybe off of their LinkedIn, profile.
Okay. Somebody else asked a question about more related to at the executive search level. Like if you had a search committee doing a search for a social media search for a candidate, an executive candidate, prospective executive, it says, what would be appropriate for the board? What could you tell the board chair of an appropriate business reason for doing a social media search on that perspective?
So if I understand the question right, is that the board wants to actually themselves engage in a social media search about an executive?
Or is it that that the organization wants to justify the social media search to the board?
It sounds like
does it mean that the organization wants to justify using a social media?
Yeah. So I think if you're an HR person, how could you, if they told you, if the board said we want to do a social media search, what business reason would you give them for doing a social media? Is there a legitimate reason?
Yeah, no, and I think that, so if you're having someone who's an executive director of a nonprofit, for example, and they are, they're posting on Twitter in a way that is, unbecoming of someone in a leadership role, right, of that level, if they are blurring the lines between, what is passionate speech and what might be incendiary in a way that's inconsistent with the way that the organization wants to present itself, or if they've shown an unwillingness to, this is actually what I've dealt with, they've shown an unwillingness to kind of separate their personal social media presence from their organization's presence, that really can speak to business judgment. And honestly, even if you get those things reined in on social media, in my experience, if someone is using judgment to, post things on Twitter that are just, really insulting and unprofessional and unbecoming, the fact of the matter is they may be a bully or a toxic employee and they might not be a good hire. So, when those concerns come up, I would urge you to step back and say, how would this actually impact our workplace if this person was using that judgment off of social media? And then I would ask questions that really get to the heart of that. When you have had, for example, individuals or stakeholders on the board who are on very different ends of the political spectrum that you've had to deal with, how have you navigated those difficult waters, and find out how would you navigate those difficult waters. Give them hypotheticals that will allow you to really judge their business sense and their professional judgment, and understand how they would approach those really challenging issues. And that'll help you, I think, get to some of the red flags that come up in the social media context and how they play out in the real world, which really helps translate, what you're getting from someone's high-profile Twitter feed, and how it's going to translate to working with boards or staffs or those types of things.
Okay, and then we have another question from somebody that is saying, what if somebody told them, I guess, on their resume that they live in Chicago, or they use another address, but then they find on social media that they actually are lying? Is that something they can consider?
Well, it's integrity. I mean, it's an integrity issue, right? I mean, if you're in an interview and you're asking, and they blatantly say that they live in Washington, D.C., and then you find that that's true. I mean, I think that would just be, for me, a red flag as an integrity issue. They're not being truthful. They can't be truthful in an interview.
So even if you found it on Facebook or something like that, would that be?
But I'm sure that into some people blur the lines of truth on social media.
That's
so how
true.
much do you factor that in as well?
Well, and I would say, I think jumping to conclusions is much easier when you're in the social media space than when you're talking to someone and asking questions. So I would say, maybe it appears on Facebook that they are living in Chicago.
But maybe they haven't changed it.
Maybe they haven't changed it.
They haven't changed their profile.
That's right.
And that could be,
I would say in that instance, you would say you could follow up with some questions. We're just trying to confirm some points on your resume. It says here that you live in Chicago. Obviously, you can match up questions to where their job is located. How long have you been in Chicago? Do you have plans to stay there, right? So that you can get at what the issue is that you're actually concerned with, and not, I think that they're a liar, liar, pants on fire on Facebook, because everyone is a liar, liar, pants on fire when they're on Facebook.
And again, they could have not, changed their profile.
Right.
That would be the first thing.
Okay, so another question is, Yvonne, do you see the most interview compliance issues with first-time managers who are green, middle managers, or senior managers who think they know it all?
That's a good question. I think yes, all of the above.
All the above.
To be honest, I think it's all of the above, because that senior leader could maybe not even been trained on how to even interview. So they're just not going to know. They're going to ask crazy questions. So, and then you have the green manager that again hasn't been trained. So you see that at all levels. It's not because of seniority.
Okay, and then I think this might be related to the question that was asked about the person living in Chicago, because I think they were, from what I'm reading here, dealing with trying to verify their pay. Maybe they're saying I live in an urban area and I command more. So they said, can an employer ask for a pay stub or a W-2 to verify their current salary, while also use it to get the salary offer to justify that they are getting it now?
So no, you can't. And in fact, there are a number of jurisdictions now, and I think there will be increasingly more jurisdictions where you can't even ask what their current pay is, because this really gets to gender pay equity issues. And the pay band that you're setting for a position really needs to be based on the value of the position and the needs there. Obviously, you can make geographic considerations, but it needs to be standardized. And so if you're making a decision to pay someone $10,000 less because their prior salary was $10,000 less, that is a big part of what local jurisdictions are trying to get at by precluding organizations from asking about prior pay, to make sure that we're not just perpetually building on the inequity that exists, particularly not just on a gender line, but also on race and national origin as well. So it's an area that you should use real caution about.
Well, that's our show for today. Thank you for listening to The Switch. Have talent acquisition needs? Launching a search for a C-suite leader? Get to know Impact Search Advisors by Nonprofit HR. We'd love to share with you how we're helping other organizations with similar needs. Nonprofit HR is your thought partner for all talent management lifecycle needs. Together, our brand ecosystem has served the social sector exclusively for more than 20 years. Call us at 202-758-2060 or email us for a mini consult at info@nonprofithr.com. Looking for more episodes of The Switch? Visit www.nonprofithr.com/The Switch and access recordings and resources to help your organization maximize its greatest asset, your talent.